Hey fam, welcome to the Free Trail Podcast and our new presenting sponsor. We're so happy to now be working with The Feed. Thefeed.com/free trail is where you need to go. It is the one-stop shop for all your training and racing nutrition needs. They have over 200 of the world's best nutrition brands stocked in one website. It's a fantastic resource. We've been big customers for a long time. We're really proud to work with them. Some of my favorite products that you can find at thefeed.com/free trail. Gnarly Nutrition Whey Protein Powder. I like the chocolate flavor. I have some of this after every one of my workouts and long runs. For in-run nutrition, Orange Drank. You'll see my big dumb face on it. Also from Gnarly Nutrition, enhanced sodium concentration here in the world's best fueling drink mix. Finally, HVMN, Ketone IQ. I have 2 of these ketone shots basically every single day, once before I go running and once in the middle of the afternoon when I need a little extra energy. Go to thefeed.com/free trail and you're going to get an $80 credit, free money to spend at thefeed.com. It'll be $20 right away and then $20 every 90 days thereafter. You'll also get a sweet Trail Running Will Save the World water bottle. Again, that's thefeed.com/free trail. You'll get $80 credit to spend on your favorite nutrition products. And if you are international, they do ship internationally as well. So you can take care or at least take advantage of that great offering from The Feed. Big thanks to The Feed for supporting and thank you for watching the podcast. Grayson Murphy, finally here on the Free Trail Podcast. Very nice to see you. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm finally excited to be here. I'm a big fan of the podcast, so it's cool to be on it now.
And I am a big fan of yours, a 2-time world champion. This podcast has been around for years, and we're just only getting around to recording for the first time here in 2024, but better late than never, as they say. And Grayson, I've already given you the prompt, the same place that I start all these interviews. That is, what makes you, you? What are your unique strengths and weaknesses? How do they show up in your life?
Yeah, I thought a lot about this over the last 3 hours that I had time to think about it. I decided that being kind of like unique and adaptable is maybe my strength. And that shows up in a lot of ways in like how I compete, but also just like the way I get into things. I never seem to have a very linear or normal path into the things that I do. And I think it takes someone that is like adaptable to make that like successful.
This is so perfect, Grayson, because I was thinking about a fun place to sort of jump off after my traditional opening question, and you're providing the perfect segue. I was reading an article about you, and there was a coach from your collegiate alma mater, the University of Utah. His name's Kepler, Coach Kepler. Yeah. And he had a quote about you that I'm going to read here and ask you to respond to. Okay. He said, she wanted to forge her own path and race on her own terms. Like her entire story, it's not a normal setup. And your original answer indicated that you are unique and that you are in some way allergic to normal. What is he hitting on there? And in what ways have you avoided normalcy in your life?
I think I don't feel like I'm defined by the status quo, or just because that's the way it's always been done or the way everyone does it. I don't feel like that's the way I need to do it. And I think I saw early on like, I can be successful not doing it that way. So then it opened up this whole world of possibility to me of like, well, anything can be done in any way. And that just makes everything like so much closer and more achievable when you like break down those barriers or conceptions of what you think it has to be. So I think that's probably what I call him. Kep is referring to. And I came to him as a sophomore in my eligibility for running, but a junior in my like academic eligibility. And I'd been running for 2 years and had made like regionals and 2 events and was like, I want to run professionally, like take me there. And he was like, okay, we've got 2 years, like we'll do it, I guess. And we did it. So I think he probably saw that in me early on.
Do you guys still keep in touch?
Yep. We talk every couple of weeks and I try and go to the track when I can in Utah. So it's nice.
He's not coaching you anymore. Of course, you're coached by David Roche. Yeah. Bring us into some of the conversations that you have with Kep, though. It must be especially entertaining for him to see how far you've come being a double world champion. And
Yep.
as you said, him sort of taking you in at a time when you really had almost no experience as an athlete, or as a runner, I should say.
Yeah, he's special as a coach. He coached me too in 2021 to my sixth place finish at the Olympic trials in steeplechase. So I have worked with him like as a professional since graduating at times. And I think he's unique in that he just supports me as a runner. And he always would tell me like, kiddo, I just want you to love running for the rest of your life. Even if you're not like competing. And especially for college coaches, I think that's unique because sometimes I think you get college coaches that are like, you're going to run 4 events at conference and we're going to like totally make you hate this sport. And he was never that way. So I appreciate him. And yeah, he's been a great mentor to have and support. I call him my track dad because people thought he was my real dad.
Track dad. Shout out Coach Kep.
Yeah.
So backing up a step, just so people are a little bit more filled in on your story. And I was just reading all about it. It's really fascinating about your trajectory from being this sort of superstar soccer player, field sport athlete, to approaching, a collegiate coach and walking on to Santa Clara University at the time. So give the listeners just a quick sense of your athletic background and what ultimately inspired you to jump into running competitively at the time that you did.
I guess so. Growing up, I have a twin sister and we're both like really athletic. So we just did like everything we could get our hands on and anything our parents would pay for us to play. We also did a lot of like non-organized sports. So we just biked a lot for fun and like constantly running around the neighborhood, rollerblading, whatever we could do outside. And growing up in Salt Lake, it's pretty easy to have like outdoor recreation access. So that was kind of, when I think about my childhood, it was less structured than one might think. But I did play soccer and we started getting competitive in about middle school, joining like the travel teams and whatnot. And when I got to high school and people were like, oh, you could get college paid for if you're good enough at this. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. Like, I'm just going to work really hard. And I'm not like the size for soccer. So I felt like I just had to work on other things like foot skills and being fast to make sure I could like just outrun people. And I did get to play in college for a year and it was cool to like have that hard work pay off. And then I realized I'm just not like super into this anymore. And it's kind of not all I thought it would be and all I had built it up to be in my head in high school. So after a year at college, transferred to Santa Clara. And I picked Santa Clara because they have a good engineering program, which is what I was studying. And then, like, side note, they had a track team. So I was like, well, I guess I'll try out for this track team. I think I'm decently fast. I had like me and my sister got dared in high school to do one track meet by our friends. So we did it and I did the 400 and the 800 and we both qualified for state, like in the events that we had chosen. And afterwards we were like, that was the worst thing we've ever done. We're never going back. And the track coach was so sad that it was like 2 state qualifiers were like, nope, sorry, we're not doing this. But I had those like times. So I was like, here's this one time I ran a 4 and an 800. Can I try out for this track team? And the coaches at Santa Clara were like, sure, we kind of want this guy on the team. Like, you can be on it too for Title IX, and then we can take this guy. So it kind of just like worked out. I just kind of like got to walk on, and the rest is history. I just developed from there.
Was that a tough time in your life? Because the thing that's unique about it is that you're switching schools and simultaneously completely changing your athletic identity and trajectory. Also, yeah, it was a period of concentrated change, it feels like.
Yeah. Yeah. Looking back, when I think back to it, it doesn't feel hard, but thinking logically, I'm like, that must have been hard for me. But I think I went into it with such a like newbie attitude or like growth mindset. And I think I was just like, well, it's just new. And I didn't start running with the intention of like being a professional runner. I just thought this will be a great way to make friends and I'll stay fit while I continue my studies. And that's it. Like, I didn't have any pressure on myself to be good at running. I just wanted to try it.
You characterize that time as going from the worst person on the team to the best person on the team. Talk about that progression, because there must have been a moment where you recognized that you had a legitimate talent for the sport.
Yeah, I think so. When I showed up, I had never run over 3 miles at one time ever. And I didn't know like running watches were a thing, like GPS watches. I think I was wearing Nike Freeze. Like, I had no idea that like running shoes existed. So just total newbie. And the first run we did, the coach was like, we're going to run for an hour. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, I've never run for an hour before. That feels like forever. So I think I made it 45 minutes and had to like call it. And fast forward to like the first race of the season, I ended up winning. Like, of the 7 of us that were racing, is cross country. I was like the first finisher for our team. And I was like, whoa, that was cool and fun. And I seem to be pretty good at this because I just beat like all these girls that have been training for their whole lives for this. So maybe there's something here. And then just trained hard, and my teammates are great. They taught me a lot too and answered questions, and the coaches too were like very encouraging and I think careful with me, which was nice. So just kind of like perfect storm, and it just skyrocketed from there.
And then you found your groove, really, it feels like, when you transferred from Santa Clara to the University of Utah, where I think you still hold several school records. Talk about that part of your career. What about that environment helped you to transition to ultimately being an All-American and a school record holder?
I think it was the program itself was a little more, they just had more funding. Unfortunately, Santa Clara, although it's a D1 school, it's like a semi D1 school because they don't have D1 funding, especially for their running program. So it was tough for the coaches to make that like a really structured environment and to support the athletes in the way that a D1 like elite runner needs to be supported. So transferring to Utah and having like a track at the school, because Santa Clara didn't even have a track at their school. Training room staff, a weight room to do like weights, and weight coach to have someone coach you, and fueling station to like make sure you're eating in between classes. That kind of all was great. And then the coaching was the next level up, and then teammates that were much faster than me not much, but they were like, I had people to challenge me and to like strive for, was nice, as opposed to being like the fastest and just like trying to do it myself.
Backing up a step, you said that you studied engineering. Say more about that. I'm interested.
Yeah, I studied civil engineering. I like math a lot. So when I was picking my degree, I was like, well, that's like applicable math. And then I picked civil because you're outside usually. If you're like working on a job site, you're either like on a construction site or if you're doing like hydrology or outside in the wilderness. So I was like, that seems like a good combo. Math.
You don't strike me as a construction worker, Grayson. I'm just going to come out and say it.
I was interested in hydrology more.
That's interesting. What about that was interesting to you? Did you have visions of pursuing hydrology professionally before your athletic career took off? Because I mean, civil engineering, I don't know, what we decide to devote our life energy to is perhaps the most important decision that we make. And we start contemplating it about the time that you were majoring in civil engineering. And you're not a civil engineer, of course, you're a professional athlete, but yeah. I'm interested in what was going through your head at that point.
At Santa Clara, a lot of our runs were around water features. So in California, a lot of their water is not naturalized. Like, it's been engineered to be there. So there's like dams and reservoirs, and canals and stuff. So I was like, oh, while I'm running, I get to look at these structures that I can do math to make. So that seems cool. But maybe I should have thought like, oh, but the running part is like what's taking you to these places. But yeah.
Interesting. Another thing you've mentioned that I'd love to dig into a little bit more is you said that you have a twin sister. Mm-hmm. And I'm remembering now, Jim Walmsley's a twin also.
Oh, I didn't
and
know.
That there's something about the bonds between twins that is special. So say a little bit more about your sister, in what ways she supported you or challenged you, or maybe you were competitive with each other growing up, and in what ways you've helped each other in whatever path you've both chosen.
Yeah, we were so competitive growing up that our parents had to request that we get put in different classes in each grade, have different teachers, because we were like competing to be the best student. And then they made us pick different sports when we turned, I think, 12 or 13. They're like, you can no longer play the same sports because you're just too competitive with each other. So she ended up picking basketball. And I picked soccer, and it was nice to have some separation because it's cool to grow up with a built-in best friend. But at sometimes, especially like when you're a teenager, you're like, I want to be my own person. Like people would call us the twins, and you're like, no, but I have a name. Please call me like Grayson. We're not just the twins. I have an identity outside of that. But now we're less competitive with each other. Now we're just best friends, really. And she's come to a lot of my races, and she's on a tackle football team now in Utah, women's football team. So I've been having fun going to her games this season, and she's a wide receiver, which is fun to imagine what that would be like, but I don't really want to do it.
Goodness, the Murphy sisters, incredible athletes. Really fun to hear about that. And I'm sure you guys share a special bond and are probably, she probably excels on the football field based on the competitive energy that existed between the two of you guys growing up, helping each other develop and become incredible athletes in your formative years here. We've sort of spoken about the moment of transition between soccer and running, and you were a little bit burnt out. I don't think finding what you were looking for in the collegiate soccer environment. And it seems like there was a second kind of crucible moment that I'd love to have you explain here on the podcast. And that is when you moved to Flagstaff and joined the NAZ Elite. Give us a sense of that period of life. I mean, on one hand, it's thrilling to go pro, especially somebody with an abbreviated development period and your late introduction to the sport. But also it seems like maybe that was a moment of burnout or something that you look back on with less than positive feelings.
Yeah. It's an interesting situation to be put into. It was my 5th year ever running, and I'm suddenly a pro in the sport. And you're like, oh, I like everything, all of your growth and learning in the sport has to be so accelerated to get to that point. And it was tough to just be like thrown into this pro team, and pro teams don't operate like college teams, which I'm sure probably everyone has guessed, but they're not quite as fun. And it's something that like is your job now. So there's the added pressure that you need to perform to be able to pay the bills and keep your contract and sponsors. And yeah, so it's a little bit different once you decide to make it your profession. And I think for me, wasn't really sure if like, I always was like unsure about track and how much I really liked track running. And then to have to do it professionally, I was like, ooh, the intensity of it isn't something that I enjoy. And I do better. Like if you told me to run a straight mile on a road where I could see like the end point, I would run faster than if you told me run around this track 4 times. Like for some reason, the laps just, I don't know why I don't run them fast. So track was always kind of a contention point anyway. And then making it my job, I was kind of like, oh, this is not super fun. Like this isn't why I started running. because if you remember, I said I started running to make friends. And this was not making friends. This was like losing friends and like less joy in the process. And I think at the end of the year with NAZ, I was just like, I'm not in a place where this is going to work for me. And it does work for some people. And I think a lot of the athletes that are successful on that team in particular are quite old. They have a new coach now, and I think they're doing great. But yeah, I think at that time it was more of a mature athletes area to be in, and that was something I really was not.
Say more about the difference between a collegiate environment and a professional environment, because I think a lot of people who observe trail running, especially, and of course my show is almost 100% devoted to trail running, there aren't really team environments. And I'm sure some of this is obvious and intuitive, just the difference between amateur racing and professional racing. Is it the economic aspect of it that you think creates a little bit more tension or a vibe that you were less comfortable with?
Yeah, I think I've come to the conclusion over the last 5 years that there's a couple things that make it different. But if I were to make a list of like the perks you get being on a college like D1 team and the perks you get being on a pro team, if I gave you the list, I think most people would think the D1 perks were the pro perks. When you're in a nice D1 program, you have like full access to weight room, training staff for free at almost any time during the day, all recovery tools for free, unlimited. We could get MRIs at the University of Utah like same day, and they were covered by the university. And then you're a student athlete too, and like with D1, you have to get, Kep was really big on good grades. So there's some performance, but also like a priority of your studies. When you're on a pro team, you get a lump sum, so you're getting paid, but honestly, I wasn't getting paid much, not enough to live on with NAZ. No health care. So you're left to figure out like, how do I do this without health care and access to the treatment? No free food. There's no fueling station handing out free food. And then I think the biggest point that I didn't like was the way NAZ is set up in a lot of pro teams where they're sponsored as a group. So like Hoka sponsors NAZ. Hoka pays NAZ a lump sum, and then it's up to the coach. At that time, it was up to Ben, our coach, to like decide who gets what. So it puts you in this weird position where your coach is also your boss. And I think that's kind of a conflict of interest where you want to do what they say, but not to, it should be a collaboration too. Like it can't be a dictatorship. But it turns into that when they're like, well, I'm the one paying you. So you feel like you need to do what they say. And running coaching is difficult. Like I think it requires feedback from the athlete too to be successful. So I think it puts, especially young athletes, where I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. This is my 5th year running. I'm just going to do whatever you tell me to. Puts you in a weird position if you do need to speak out and say like, this isn't right for me, or I think this isn't working for me. Yeah, it's a weird spot to be in. That's why I think it works better if you're a more mature athlete that already kind of knows like what works and you feel comfortable speaking up.
That's so great. I'm so glad I asked that. Part of the thing that I love to do on the show is really get into the details of what the actual reality is of being a professional athlete. I think you did a great job of describing it. And eventually we're going to come around to talk about how you specifically approach your life as being a professional, not just an athlete. Mm-hmm. Going a little bit further, though, on this NAZ story, I read that you said that Ben Rosario, who you're mentioning, who's the coach, and he's sort of operating like Bill Belichick did for the Patriots. So for those who don't know, he was the head coach and the GM. So in other words, he coached the team and he made all the financial decisions about who's getting paid what. Ben, from what I know, I don't know him super well personally, but he's a respected person with a good reputation. And I think you said that he actually helped you think about your options and your next steps at the time. So I'd love to hear you talk about that, the contemplation that went into it and the ultimate decision to leave the team and pursue your own path.
Yeah, it was tough, but I called him and was like, we need to sit down and talk about some stuff. And I went over to his house and we talked, and he was very like open, and it was like not super hidden that I was unhappy. It was pretty obvious, I think, that I was struggling with the environment and I missed home. It's one thing like if you live in Flagstaff with your family and you're there all the time, but I was there by myself. So it feels like you're on a training camp 100% of the time, and your support system is just kind of like worlds away from you, which is tough. And so he was very receptive, and I kind of told him like, I think I need to go home and be closer to my support system. And we kind of talked about like, is that something that I can still do? Like, can I be on NAZ and go home? And ultimately they were like, no, I respect them for this. Like they want the team to be like an in-person team, and that's part of what makes it the team that it is. So they're like, no, I don't think we can. And then I was kind of like, I might be interested in trail running. Like, can I try that? And they were like, well, not with us. Like maybe like Hoka would support you separately, but like you can't do trail running and be on NAZ. But yeah, I still would say Ben is a good friend, and I've talked to him since, and living in Flagstaff was able to connect with him a few times since. So yeah, I think it's been nice to have that support and not feel like he didn't take it personally. And I think he knows like I did what I thought was better for me.
Yeah. So, but then leaving NAZ Elite, that necessitates or that means that you're forfeiting your contract with Hoka. So walk us through that. How did you eventually sort of get connected with Saucony and find that path forward after a time of confusion?
Yeah, it was interesting. Hoka told me they thought I would not be good at trail running, so they wouldn't sponsor me in trail running. So that's funny to look back on, and jokes on them, I guess. But I went unsponsored for 3 months after I chose to leave the NAZ contract, and it definitely was my choice. Like, I feel like there were some things out there that were like, she got kicked out, but they definitely gave me a choice. And I did choose to walk out of it. And I did Cirque Series, a couple of Cirque Series races, and then won US Mountain Champs, and Saucony was there. And at that point, they were like, oh, we'll sponsor you. So they kind of like swooped in, and I've been so happy to be with them. And they sponsor me for road, track, and trail, which I feel like is a unique contract opportunity. So that's been cool too, that they see me as a valuable runner in like all three disciplines.
Let's come back and talk about that in a second, but it was around this time where I became familiar with you, Grayson. I, of course, don't really pay attention to collegiate track and field. I'm not super educated on the NAZ Elite or the professional track and field world either, but it was at the 2019 World Mountain Running Championship where you, at least in my opinion, sort of, burst onto the international trail running scene, winning the world championship. And it was probably the most successful individual showing ever for Team USA, because not only did you win gold, but Joe Gray also won the gold medal, and Jim Walmsley. Mm-hmm. So tell us about that experience, because it feels like that was sort of the pivotal moment for you that sent you down the path that you've been on the last 5 years.
It was so unexpected. I just started trail running because I thought that sounds fun. I didn't think like there were no goals attached, similar to why I started running. I just thought it sounds fun. I'll try it. And it snowballed in such a quick amount of time, in like 1 year. So it was again another like accelerated growth period that I had to adapt to. And I did not go to Worlds thinking I was going to win either. I think I, along with everyone else, did not expect me to win that race. So it was just as surprising to me as I think everyone back home. But I just had so much fun and realized like, oh, I think I might have like a special talent here. Like maybe my unique skill set, I have finally found like what it's good for. I always felt like just a little bit missing one thing, like on the track or the road. And then when I did the mountain race, I was like, oh, I got to use everything, and it played out so well. I think I've finally figured out like what I might be good at.
how long was that, you winning the world championship, after you had officially left NAZ Elite?
6 months.
Was there a sense of validation? I imagine in that 6 months, there was a lot of question marks in your head about what you were doing with your life and with your athletic career. Winning the world championship in Argentina probably gave you a sense of confidence that you were doing the right thing.
Yeah, it definitely paid dividends. And I think I learned again that it's good to bet on yourself, even if it looks different from what everyone might tell you. Like, I started running so late, and I think most people would be like, you can't do that and be successful. But it worked, and I was a 5-time All-American, and then I did it again, and it just reinforced the idea that you can follow different paths and it can still be successful at the end of the day.
I love that. Thank you so much, Grayson. Maybe we'll talk about other ways in which you plan to bet on yourself.
Okay.
Anything from Joe Gray or Jim specifically? I was curious about this because they both won gold medals that same weekend in the World Mountain Running Championships. Joe in the short course, Jim in the long course. They're a bit older, more experienced than you, obviously legends in their own right. Is there anything that you gleaned from them on that trip or outside of that trip that made you more inspired to pursue trail and mountain running?
Yeah, they were both. I definitely remember picking both of their brains about the course and just like what they thought of the competition. I remember asking Joe, like, how well do you think I can do? Because I have literally never raced anyone in this field before, because I have never raced an international trail race before. So, like, I have no idea what to expect. What do you think? And he was like, I think you can win. And when he said that, I was like, okay, if Joe says that, he doesn't hand out compliments like left, right, and center. He's very reserved with who he compliments. So I was like, okay, I think like he might be right if he's saying that, because he would definitely tell me if he thought like I was going to lose.
He's maybe the only American who could hold a candle to your mountain running resume, Joe Gray. So cool. So then coming back to your career and betting on ourselves, at the end of last year, you sent me a message and we got on the phone after you had listened to my podcast with Aaron Lutzy, where we talked about being a 21st century professional athlete. And one of the things that I certainly admire about you is that you think about yourself, your position within the sport, your long-term career really intentionally. So before we get into some of the specifics of that stuff, I'd love to hear you talk about sort of at what point you realized that you needed to think bigger, that simply training and racing wasn't enough for you.
Mm-hmm. I think in college, and it goes back to Kep too, like he recognized that I like was an athlete and a student, and he prioritized both, and he celebrated like our team. He always loves to win the like highest team GPA award every quarter at the University of Utah. So he really like instilled in me that that part of life was just as important as the running results too. And I think it was helpful to have that like mentorship and mindset coming into professional running, where I was like, well, why would I just throw that all away now? And especially if I was going to pursue engineering, you can't just not do it for 10 years and then like decide you want an engineering job, because it evolves so quickly. So I was like, well, I need to like stay relevant outside of running as well, in case maybe this isn't what I want to be doing, and or I get injured, or God forbid, like something happens, I can't continue this running thing. Like I don't want to be left high and dry. So I started doing the training logs, investing more in like social media, which has morphed. My view on that has kind of like gone up and down the last couple years. But yeah, just trying to like network too has been important, and be a brand, work with like protect our winters, like volunteer things too that you don't get paid for, but you can network and start building communities that aren't your race results. And then someday, like you can fall back on those.
I love that anecdote about Coach Kepler and wanting to win the highest GPA award too, because it's almost like you're building character at the same time you're building fitness and athleticism, because at the end of the day, getting good grades in a lot of cases is an effort thing, not necessarily an IQ. thing. And yeah, the way you describe that carrying over into your athletic career and applying it towards other aspects, I definitely see the parallel there. You have a couple of entrepreneurial projects, so maybe talk about those and in what ways that those have supported your athletic career to just, add a little bit more detail for the audience.
Yeah, first, like the training logs. So they're a training log and a daily planner for everyone that doesn't know. And they're like combined because I was carrying around 2 books, one for each, and then thought, why can't they be the same thing? So at first it was like a passion project and just a way for me to connect with the running community outside of my race results. Ben Rosario too with NAZ was pretty good about his like motto is like share the journey or share your story. And I think that's pretty effective with how NAZ has become a great team that a lot of people love. So I took that and was like, okay, this is a way for me to like share this without it being a running result. It did not make me any money the first year. I think I broke even. So it's definitely not a financial pursuit, but it was fun. And I learned, like I said, did not study business in college. So I learned on the fly, like business things, how to print stuff, how to sell stuff, what it means to run a business, paid sales tax. And then it's kind of morphed the last 6 years into it is making a good chunk of money now. And it's still a great way for me to connect with the running community. And like on the training logs Instagram, people send pictures of like their training and how they're using it. And that's so cool because that's like other people. It's not a pro. And it's cool to see like I'm using it and they're using it. So we're really not that different at the end of the day.
Very cool. I'll make sure to link to this stuff in the show notes. You told me that last week when we spoke on the phone, you said something about how you had a new brand name for your company. Do you want to talk about that now, or is that still private?
I can talk about it now. It will be launching July 16th, and it'll be called Wild Strides Paper Co. It'll include the training log and then also like journals, some fun greeting cards for runners. One says happy coach anniversary, which I'm excited to give to my coaches.
Oh, that's brilliant. I love it.
One says like marathons are tough, but you're tougher. One says like congrats on your PB or PR, whichever one you like. So stuff like that, just to like be light and fun, and kind of add to I've always really been into stationery for some reason since I was a little kid. So this is like a dream project to be able to create my own for runners and athletes. So it's a fun mix of like everything. And yeah, I'm hoping that it becomes like a nice thing to rely on if I do decide to retire. One day I'll retire, but hopefully not for a while. But I'll have that too, to be able to keep running and connecting with the running community.
So cool. Grayson Murphy, world champion and stationery tycoon.
Yeah.
One thing that maybe you could go a little deeper on here. I mean, obviously stationery is an analog product, a great way to connect with human beings with a physical artifact. You just mentioned that social media, you've had an up and down relationship with it. Talk about that a little bit.
This is a can of worms. Are you sure you want to open it?
Yes, let's do it. This will be very relatable.
Okay. Yeah, I think I started social media. I was in college and it was just fun. And I really didn't have many feelings around it. And for whatever reason, I gained a lot of followers. I'm not really going to speculate on why. And then as a pro, it just was pretty organic, like continued to gain. It seemed like I'm pretty open about sharing stuff, and because that's just kind of who I am. It wasn't a stretch for me. So doing that on social media felt natural, and people liked that, I think, and the relatability and openness. And then the algorithm has changed a lot in the last couple of years on Instagram in particular, and it does not reward that so much anymore. It has become more like influencers, more clickbait, more videos, just stuff that's like less real, I think. And it's a tough space to be in because for the first 3 years of my professional career, I leveraged my social media following with brands for sponsorships and bigger brand deals. And I was okay with that because I felt like I just have to share me and they like it and I like it. It's easy for me to do. And it responds on Instagram like, this is so easy. And then it turned into like, you need to act like an influencer and act like someone who you're not, which is like bubbly and outgoing and like wants to share vlogs of your life. I'm not that funny either. So I just like can't be a TikTok personality. And that was tough because it was like, it morphed into something that was more out of my control. And yeah, it's been a weird space the last 2 years. Like I won Worlds last year and I lost 2 sponsorships because I didn't have enough engagement on Instagram. And it's tough to like, you literally win the world championship and then they tell you like that's not enough because you didn't get enough likes on this post. And you're like, but I'm a runner.
Ridiculous. You have over 100,000 followers on your account.
Yeah. And yeah, I'm a runner at the end of the day. Like I'm not an influencer. So if you're going to judge me by that and you don't care that I just won Worlds, like I don't know if I want to work with you either, but 100%. It feels like a slap in the face. So
social media is such a double-edged thing because I've learned so much through it. And now it makes me just feel very old, even logging on to Instagram, because the algorithm, as you said, has changed so much to where it is just all videos and TikTok style content that I do not resonate with or want to watch at all, you know, like, and that's why I've always spent the majority of my time on Twitter, which is now X, which is also super confusing, but like at least it's content that I can read, that like I can really curate. They're not sending me a whole bunch of, you know, discover this type content into my feed, and I have a little bit more control over it and it moves a little bit slower. So again, I think maybe that's reflective of me getting a little bit older and just having an allergic reaction to the short form video that is ubiquitous. But again, you do have to play the game sometimes. And so, you know, we have to feed the algorithm what it wants. And I often cringe, you know, when we have to do that. But interesting to talk about. You work with Josh Cox as your agent. He's one of the most prominent agents in the sport of running. And I think he's getting more and more involved in the trail side after being a professional road racer himself and representing a lot of the top road and track athletes. What has he contributed, or how has he helped you to think about your career beyond just performance?
Yeah, he's been a very influential figure for me, and I'd say, pretty close. I've learned a lot about business from him too. So with the Wild Strides and paper company stuff, he's just great, like a wealth of knowledge because he's worked with so many brands. So yeah, I think his views too, both of us have been forced to like update our views because at the beginning too, he was like, we're going to use social media to get you more brands. And it worked really well for a couple of years. And then the last 2 years, both of us are like, what the heck? Like, we don't even know what to do now. We need to adapt to this new atmosphere or landscape of social media. And I think we're both kind of still trying to figure out where do we go from here. And my question is like, if it continues the way it does and influencers keep getting paid as much as they do, and that's more important, where does that leave the state of professional running? And what will that look like in the future for runners? Like, will we just not get paid? But then will levels of performance drop off because people just can't afford to like not have a job and perform how they need to train that much? So it's kind of a weird conundrum to be in.
Fascinating conversation. I'd love to have Josh on the podcast potentially.
Yeah, good luck. He's a little hard to get a hold of.
Oh, is he? Okay. All right. Well, maybe you can help me with that. But if not, maybe we'll save it for a future date whenever it works out for the two of us. Maybe I'll take him to a Padres game, or he'll take me to a Padres game.
He'll talk. Yeah.
I've never met him, but I've followed him for a long time, and I've heard he's great for the athletes that he works with. So coming back to what you said just a little while ago about Saucony sponsoring you across road, track, and trail, you really were sort of the original crossover athlete, sort of you and Max King, but especially you. Tell us about that, because I mean, to me, and maybe this is another thing that's relevant to your relationship with Josh, because, you know, my guess is that you were probably the first person ever to have a contract that explicitly rewarded you across those 3 disciplines?
I think, yeah, me and Josh, to our knowledge, we think that I was, which is pretty cool. And I know for a fact that it has other athletes, we have used that because Josh represents them too, to get them something similar. So it's been cool to see brands like invest in that and be open to considering crossover athletes that want to compete in all 3 disciplines. Yeah, that's been a cool like thing to watch happen and be at the front of.
Yeah, because now, you and I have spoken in the past about the trail team, what Andy Wacker's doing, people like Mika Boudon-Rousseau and Anna Gibson especially, and this new crop. Do you have a sense of what the future looks like there? Do you feel like there's going to be more Grayson Murphys? Because originally my thesis was that everything was going to become more specialized, where people would have their specific surfaces and distances. There'd be VK specialists in the same way that there would be 800-meter specialists, and then there'd be 200-mile specialists, et cetera. But what you provide an example of is no, and Anna Gibson's similar. I think she's in the middle of her track season right now before she transitions to a more formal trail season. And maybe there will be more of these hybrid type athletes. What direction do you think we're headed there? I'd be curious to hear your opinion.
I've never thought of it that way. I think I've always kind of hoped there would be more people like me, because I think it is interesting and it's cool to root for people like that seem to be able to do all 3. And I think for trail running especially, it elevates the sport in a way. I think sometimes, like, I got this when I left NAZ on some unfortunate let's run threads about myself, but that like running trails because I wasn't good enough to run on the track or the road. And I think there is this misconception with road and track people that you just run slow on the trails and like it's not hard, or it's just where like the varsity or JV team goes because they're not good enough for the road and the track. And I think it shows when you have people like me and Anna and Mika and Laura and Gregory too, that like it is a different skill set, and just because you're good at running on the road doesn't mean you'd be good at trails, and vice versa too. And I think it highlights that, and that it kind of forces you to respect trail running more if it's shown that like I have no idea how Eliud Kipchoge would do in like a trail race or a mountain race. Like, we should see, but it's crazy to think just because he's so good at the marathon, he would like dominate a trail race, because it's a different skill set.
Yeah. It's interesting because there is a nature versus nurture aspect to it. Also, you grew up in Utah. I think you were a semi-outdoorsy mountain girl growing up. Mika, I know, was big in recreating in the Eastern Sierra, climbing with his family as a kid. Obviously, Anna grew up in Jackson Hole and spent a lot of time in the mountains. So I think you probably do have to have at least some exposure to those environments for the road and track speed to translate into mountain running speed. But for those who do have that experience and that ambition, I think it'll be an exciting future to build a career across different disciplines in the sport. Yeah. And a lot of people, I think, will be following your example. Coming back to the state of Utah, I want you to talk about the significance of home and the significance of Utah, because you've left and returned a couple of times. And in fact, I think when you called me last year, you had just pulled back into your driveway after moving home from, I think it was Flagstaff. So talk about that, the emotional and personal feelings of returning home, and just sort of the significance that your home state has had in your life.
Yeah, I don't know what it is about Utah. I just keep getting sucked back in. It's so pretty. I have a hard time going other places, and I can appreciate other places, but I think it's so pretty here. It's hard to be like, oh, well, I'll move here. Like, it just, there's something about it that I just love. And then having family here is having family. So they're my support system, and I grew up around my family and I'm still close with them. So being able to see them means a lot to me, and being able to see my twin more now that I'm back is important. And I think just overall, I feel like happier here and it feels like home to me. So I think I've left a couple of times, and I'm glad I've left to try other things to make sure that this is where I want to be. But yeah, I hope I'm here for a while now.
Has reacquainting yourself with home had any material impact on your running and training or your personal health? Because I think, again, what we decide to devote our energy to in life is the biggest decision that we make, but maybe the second biggest decision that we make is where we live. This is something my wife and I have talked about a lot in the last 5 years because we've moved a couple of times and now we're in Marin County with our house and we're so happy, and it's lifted a certain weight off of us that is difficult to describe, but makes a huge difference across all aspects of our life. I'm wondering if you have experienced something similar coming back home.
Yeah, I think I have. It's so special to wake up and go out the door in the morning and just think like, oh, I'm so lucky to live here. Like, I'm so grateful. Pinch me. Like, can't believe I live here and get to call this place home. I think mentally that lifts a load off, and then everything's nicer. Like, even if you have a bad run, you're like, well, at least I love this place. So I can just look at it and focus on that instead of like how bad my legs feel. But from like a practical standpoint too, there's a lot more vert in Utah than there was in Flagstaff, and that's been helpful. In Flagstaff, you've got like the Grand Canyon is kind of like the biggest run to get vert, but it's weird because it's like an inverted mountain. You go down first, which is like not many people's preferred way to get
especially
vert.
As you get older, Grace, and you don't want to run downhill first. No way.
Yeah. So being here and having like big mountains, like very accessible, has been sweet. And it just inspires me to like keep running too, which is big, I think, especially when you're training a lot. You have to rely on the views to inspire you sometimes. Like the motivation isn't always high.
So you also won the Female Athlete of the Year for the state of Utah last year. You, of course, won your second world championship in addition to moving back home. So maybe, and you and I spoke about this on our Trail Runner of the Year conversation, but maybe for those who didn't listen to that, maybe just talk us through the last 6 months for you after winning your second world championship, moving home, and then we'll start kind of talking about present day stuff in your season this year.
Okay. Yeah, it was not good, actually, the 6 months following.
I know there was some ups and downs. I mean, you win some world championships, but then life throws a curveball. Yeah.
I was on top of the world, and then I was on the bottom of the world, or what it felt like. I don't still, like, to this day, still, like, working on figuring it out. Some doctors, I saw so many doctors. So it got to where I just, like, felt so bad, couldn't breathe, just even sitting around the house, and couldn't, like, the most I could do all of July was sit on the couch and watch the Tour de France. Like, I could not move off the couch. Walking up the stairs was hard. Talking on the phone was hard. So I think, in the end, they decided it was an autoimmune condition, but still yet to be, like, fully decided on which one, because there's many. And then there was confusion of, is this, like, a weird long COVID thing in tandem with this autoimmune condition? Are they separate? Maybe no COVID at all. It was very confusing, and I never really got the best answers. It's still like an ongoing journey that I'm dealing with even in training. So that part was not good. But I did move home in February, so that was really nice and kind of spurred on too by not having access to healthcare in Flagstaff was difficult. Waiting like weeks and weeks to get tests done was really delaying the recovery process. And it was stressful thinking like, I'm going to lose my job if I can't get these doctors to like hurry their shit up, because they just seem so like unconcerned with my issues or situation that they're like, 6 weeks, you can come back. And I'm like, 6 weeks? Like, that's like a whole training cycle gone. So moving home, having support system, family nearby to help if like I get sick again. And then the University of Utah medical system is one of the best in the world. So being close to that is nice. And I'm getting married in September. So having Logan here too is just like, yeah, all the things. So it's been nice to be back for sure.
What day in September, if you don't mind saying it publicly?
Oh, the 1st of September.
My anniversary is the 16th, so
It's a good month.
time. Good time to get married in the mountains.
Yeah.
Before we get to that, I want to hear about the start to this season because you went over to China to make your much anticipated Golden Trail World Series debut. You finished 3rd place there in what looked like a really tough event at super high altitude. Tell us about the Four Sisters race and making that much anticipated debut.
Yeah, it was a lot going into it, a lot of emotions. The course itself is sweet. You start 10,000 feet. The first, half is like a big climb up to 14,000 feet. And then you have this mega descent. It was like 2,300 feet of loss in a mile and a quarter. So you just bomb down the side of this Himalayan mountain, which was so cool. And when you summit, actually, you get to see Mount Segunyong, which is at 21,000 feet. You're at 14,000 feet, and this thing is like 7,000 feet above you. And you're like, oh my God, I've just never seen anything that big before.
Wow.
So that was cool. And then it's like a runnable last half. So the course itself was great. I was disappointed with 3rd. I cramped like I've never cramped in my life. And this was
I saw the videos and photos of it.
It was, people thought the finish line was when I cramped, but that was happening for the last like 90 minutes of that race. And the bottom of my feet were cramping, so my toes were like curling inside my shoes. And I was like, what is going on? So it was not a comfortable time for me. And I was disappointed with 3rd, but I think the Golden Trail was cool. It was a little intimidating to debut there because their media is great, but then it also makes it like a little unapproachable to come into as the outsider because they like hype it up so much.
Yeah.
And like hype up the other athletes. And I think it's weird that they're like Salomon sponsors the series, but they also sponsor runners in the series, but not all the runners. So it's like a weird dynamic of like, are they like the chosen ones and like we're all just trying, like we're there for like the kill so that they can like beat us, or like where does that leave the rest of us that aren't with Salomon? That's interesting. But yeah, I
just had Greg Volley on the podcast and we talked
Really?
all about this. Yeah.
Okay,
And I mean, from his perspective, and I take him at his word, and I think it's actually sort of a noble intention where obviously at the end of the day, Golden Trail World Series is owned by Salomon and therefore is only successful if it moves the needle in the sales of their trail running product. And effectively the way they look at it is that if Golden Trail World Series can grow the trail running market as a whole, Salomon being one of the leaders in the sport over the course of a couple of decades will benefit from the overall growth of the sport and the market position that they hold already, and that they've gone out of their way to make it accessible to people from other brands. And we are seeing that a lot more now in recent years, where in the early iterations of the Golden Trail World Series, it did feel more like a Salomon commercial. But having somebody of your caliber there, and I think I know what you're talking about with the media too, because they're hyping you up, maybe trying to create a little bit of like artificial tension or controversy around, oh, Grayson Murphy's here, and like, are you going to beat her or whatever? And they're definitely playing into that made for TV type spirit. And, sometimes it makes you roll your eyes or whatever, but at the end of the day, pretty cool product and an awesome race. It seemed like for you over in China, even if it was disappointing.
Yeah. And I think there were cool things. And once I met everyone and I was like, oh, you guys are actually so nice. It's just, the optics of it are so intimidating to walk into as the outsider. But once you meet everyone, you're like, wow, they're all so nice. And they just want everyone to have a good time. And it is cool. Like I got supported with some airfare travel, which is coming from probably indirectly Salomon. and they're not my sponsor. So it is
Right.
cool that they're like supporting me in that way, and other people too that aren't with Solomon, not Saucony.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I do appreciate that. And I think for short trail running, it's like a cool, like sub ultra, it's a cool way to show that part of the sport to everyone else.
I had heard that you had intended to race in Japan the weekend before, but you had travel problems. Is that true?
Yeah, I was trying to get my Chinese visa, and they still had my passport until like 4 days after I was supposed to be in Japan. So
Oh, shit.
I missed all of Japan and had to just go straight to China.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. Well, then let's start talking about what you have planned for the rest of the season. But before we get there, you just mentioned it, and I'm a very sentimental guy. So I'd love to hear you talk about wedding planning, getting engaged, getting married.
Yep.
Tell the listeners about how you're feeling, in these last 3 months before you tie the knot with your longtime partner.
Yeah, I'm very excited. So we've been together 7 years. We've only just started living together 2 weeks ago after 3 years of living apart, because Logan was a professional Nordic skier. He decided to retire this spring. But yeah, it was interesting to be dating another professional athlete, and trying to coordinate schedules was like a nightmare, especially because he was like my off season and I'm his off season. So it just like never seemed to work. We did make it work though, obviously, but it is not for the faint of heart. So I'm very excited to finally be like moving into that chapter with him, and we'll be married in Bozeman, Ennis, Montana, just outside of Bozeman. And planning has been, I don't know why, maybe I'm doing it wrong or like missing some things, but it hasn't been that bad. I keep thinking like the training logs are way harder than this. This is nothing. But maybe I've missed some big key details that I'm not thinking of.
Yeah. Well, enjoy it. Yeah, I had nothing to do with the planning of my own wedding. So if you need extra help, just call my wife, and I'm sure she'd be happy to lend a hand. She absolutely loved the process, although I think she did stress her out a little bit. But say a little bit more about Logan retiring, because that's an interesting dynamic, and maybe something where it gives you guys both an opportunity to learn about that process. So him stepping away from his sport, Nordic skiing, and in what ways that might impact his ability to now support you on your professional career, and things that you've learned about the retirement process that might be interesting to share.
Yeah. Yeah, it's nice. Like on the one hand, it is nice because he has a lot more time now, so he can come to more of my races. He was in China with me. That's the first time he's seen me compete internationally, which was pretty fun. And I think that's cool. It is tough to like watch someone go through retirement like that though, and it makes me nervous for my time when that comes, because it does seem hard. And he's been skiing since he was 5 years old. So he's been doing it longer than I've been running, and I just can't imagine like you work so hard for so long towards something and then it's just over. And part of him wanted to be done, but I think part of him is like, it's obviously sad it's over because he enjoyed his sport. So it's tough to watch someone go through, and it's been interesting for me to learn too, like as a partner, how do you support someone going through that? Like, what do they want to hear? How do you want me to like talk about it with you? And we had a lot of like, I would say something the wrong way and it wouldn't be received well. So I had to learn like my language too, especially leading up to what I think he knew too was going to be like retirement, but it had to come from him. I couldn't be like, you need to retire or give an ultimatum. Like it needs to come from him. So yeah, I think we learned a lot, but I think it probably made us better communicators in general, which is good for the relationship. And I am not looking forward to the day that I have to make the same decision. That will be very difficult, I think.
It will be difficult, but you'll have a stationery empire to fall back on, won't you, Grayson?
It'll be okay.
Yes, awesome. All right, well, before we get to our traditional closing question, tell all your fans where they can expect to see you racing this season. I'm particularly very interested to hear about the calendar and your goals for 2024.
Okay, yeah. So the next one will be Broken Arrow. I think I'll do the VK and 23K right now, unless not feeling it, but hopefully I'll do both. And then Cirque Series. Snowbird is hosting US Mountain Champs this year, which I am
huge. That's so awesome.
Stoked about. Yeah, I've been pushing for that for a long time, and I'm just so pumped. It's like in my backyard, and I love Julian, and Snowbird's so cool, and I can't wait for people to see Utah and to go hopefully defend my title on like home turf would be amazing. And after that, Sierra Zinal, beginning of August.
Yes.
Yeah.
All
so
right.
finally, hopefully getting there. Fast one. And September wedding, and then Marin Headlands and Mammoth Trail Fest. Yeah. So we'll be there. So that's my 4. I'll have 4 for Golden Trail, and then the final, hopefully. And then like maybe some Cirque Series in there. I've kind of played around with, sometimes me and my coach float the idea of like the 50K this year, depending on how some of the longer races go. Maybe like 50K champs for the US, or maybe like half marathon champs in Moab. We'll see. So,
holy smokes. A lot to be excited about for Grayson Murphy fans.
Yeah. We'll see.
Amazing. What a season. Well, I can't wait to follow along. I just really enjoy following your career and how you approach everything. And now, especially as you sort of tackle a lot of the Golden Trail stuff, something that we've all been very excited to see you do. And Broken Arrow too. I don't think you've ever raced at Broken Arrow, have you?
No, yeah.
Okay, awesome.
I've heard amazing things, so I can't wait to see it.
Great. Well, Grayson, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. It's so fun to chat with you, and I can't believe it's taken this long to have you on the show, but that was really, really a fun episode. I end every podcast with the same closing question. That is, who is one person that you admire, can be inside or outside of sport, living or dead, and why do you admire that person?
I think I thought a lot about this, and this is such a hard question to answer. It might change every day, but I feel like I really admire my twin sister. I think she's cool, and she does things like, she's my size, but she played basketball in college, and she's now on a tackle football team. And I think she also does things kind of like in her own way, and doesn't really care like if people are like, no, you're too small, or that's not how you should do it. So I admire her for that. And she's not a professional athlete, but she still has like big athletic goals and dreams. And I think that's really inspiring to see. Like, we can all, like, it's relatable for me to relate to her and be like, yeah, you can go be like, she got called up for the Pro Bowl this weekend, which is so cool.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think it's cool to see, like, she has a full-time job, but then she's crushing this like football thing that she just started. So I don't know. It's fun to see people like do stuff like that and just send it.
What's her name?
Maddie.
Shout out Maddie Murphy, right? Maddie Murphy. All right. Well, Grayson, what a great way to end it. I'm, again, very grateful you would come on the show. Good luck this season, and we'll see you at Broken Arrow.
Thank you so much.